Hello and welcome to Wine and Words. I'm your host, Sarah Jane Rose, audiobook narrator and wine consultant, and we are at the end of Mystery March now, and we are looking at today Pinot Noir and the Spirit Engineer, which I'm really excited to talk about. And it seems to me like the perfect day. I don't know about you, the wind has been howling here. I opened the door this morning to snow, then sunshine, then more snow, and then howling winds. So it's been a kind of spooky kind of day. So I'm flinging this around. I've forgotten I've opened it already. I'm spilling wine everywhere. So we're going to be talking about that. So as usual with Wine and Words, what happens is I take you through the wine. I do a bit of a tasting and tell you a little bit about the wine. I have tenuously linked the wines to a quick crime story, and then we go in to talk about the book and my thoughts and feelings, plus any questions that you might have. Now, in this week's Wine and Words, I actually have a pre-recorded chat for you. I met with the author, A.J West, earlier on in the week, and we had a great chat about his inspiration to write the book, and that was brilliant. So I'm going to play that after we've done a bit of the wine tasting. So I'm going to move straight into tasting a bit of Pinot Noir, talking about Californian Pinot Noir and prohibition. So I thought that would be a good one to bring in. So as I say, this is the Crusher Pinot Noir from California, and you can get Californian Pinot Noir can be extremely expensive. You can run into hundreds of pounds for it. You can also get very low-end Pinot Noir, and the struggle for me there is that Pinot Noir is, and if anybody's watched Sideways, Pinot Noir is a very delicate grape, and it takes a certain amount of care and delicacy to grow and a certain climate for it to really do well. That doesn't mean you can't grow it, and you do get lots of sort of lower end, fluffy, fine Pinot Noirs, and that's fine. What I hope I kind of impart on a lot of these videos is that I'm not actually particularly a massive wine snob. There's a wine for everybody, and if you like the low-end fluffy Pinot Noirs that are full of cherry and then that's absolutely great. I don't have a, there's nothing to be judged on that. I prefer, if I'm going to go for a Pinot Noir, yes, it's a lighter option in many ways. This is a slightly dark one. This has actually got a little bit of Petit Syrah, literally 4% of Petit Syrah in it. But for that sort of lighter style of wine, Pinot Noir is a great thing to go for. What I like about Pinot Noir, and I've talked about this before, is this elegance that you can get from it, and this depth of character that can come in from something that looks so simple, and you can get such variation with such a simple grape. And then that goes across sort of all wine, really. You can get one grape made in one place that is one thing, and the same grape grown somewhere else, which is completely different and under different circumstances. So this is a slightly bigger style of Pinot Noir. For a couple of reasons. One, because it has that little bit of Petit Syrah in it, but it also has 10 months oak aging on it, which is really nice, and it gives it just a little bit of extra depth and flavour. And on the nose, it's really vibrant. You immediately, sometimes with Pinot Noir, when you go to the nose, you can sort of struggle to get stuff. It takes a while. You have got to really kind of get into it to get those notes out, but this immediately springs out to the glass with you with kind of a bit of baked cherry, actually, rather than that fresh red cherry. Something quite smoky. There's earthiness on the nose, which is always a good sign for me with the Pinot Noir, and something like a little bit of almost a bit of dampness. I don't mean that in a bad way, just that depth. So I could smell that's really lovely actually on the nose already. That's great. It's really, really different in terms of compared to some of those fluffier Pinot Noirs that you might be drinking or might be getting. And it has this very silky texture and balance to it. So I've got some lovely acidity coming in, which is really nice. And then I've got a little bit of tannin, just that coatingness, but it's really quite gentle and smooth. And then I've got the smokiness coming through, that kind of cooked cherry, a bit of something a bit darker, maybe even like a damson or something, and it's still going. There's a huge amount of flavour going on there, touches of spice, touches of wood on the finish. That's a really good, and I'd say you compare that with a huge amount of things from sort of darker meats and that kind of stuff, aubergine, really nice, mushroom, anything mushroomy. Just gonna do that again. So, my tenuous link for this week, I'm going to keep this quite short because my chat with AJ is quite long. We got a bit carried away. So I wanted to talk about, as I thought it was an interesting period, and it's not quite, it's just after the book itself, The Spirit Engineer, takes place 2 years after the sinking of the Titanic in 1914. And so I've skipped ahead a little bit to prohibition, although there was talk of prohibition really in various states, forms of, from about 1912 anyway. And obviously what happened, so prohibition took place from 1920 to 1933, so 13 years of alcohol not being able to be imported or made. However, you were technically allowed, the head of households in California were allowed to make up to 200 gallons of wine for their family and friends, sounds like quite a lot really, per year. So you could kind of get away with it on there, but anything else over that you weren't allowed to produce, and they would come and inspect you. There are obviously lots of lovely stories of people defying the law, and there's one which also have a book to it as well, which is called The Great Prohibition Caper by John E. Bargetto, and it was the Bargetto brothers that this story is affiliated with. So they were making various bits of wines, not in huge quantities, and they were for their family. And then they were visited, and what did they call them? The inspectors found 22 barrels of very fine wine. But because it was a very long journey, mountainous journey on the way back, so they couldn't take them away there and then. So what the inspectors decided to do was they sealed them with a wax seal and stamped them so that the wine couldn't be tampered with or used until they came back. They didn't come back for 10 days. And when they came back, the wine barrels were still there, fully intact. The seal was still intact. And so they took the barrels and went to tip them into the creek. And when the wine was tipped out, it was very, very pale, suspiciously so. So at some point during those 10 days, the Bargatti brothers had managed to switch the wine, as the legend goes, and sort of get away with having a little bit more wine for their friends and family. Now, as I said, there's a whole book about this story and the production of wine during Prohibition. And so I just thought that was an interesting one to say. So they found it literally just hidden in the barn under a tarp. So there's loads of stories about people defying, obviously, the laws during that time. And it was interesting because wine wasn't really the target of Prohibition, but obviously it was considered alcohol. And it came about obviously because of the abuse of alcohol leading up to that. So really from the late 1800s onwards, that it was driven, it's sort of said, by some of the women who were conscious that alcohol abuse was affecting their men's ability to go to work, their men's ability to earn money, and obviously resulting in violence, and that's kind of what spearheaded the beginning of Prohibition. And that subject of men being under pressure to be the earners, and then men behaving badly. Not so much the alcohol abuse itself, but the pressure on men to be the breadwinners is what brings us seamlessly linking into the book, The Spirit Engineer, by A.J. West, which I really love. So this was recommended to me by Kenilworth Books, and I met with AJ earlier on in the week, and we explored his inspiration to write the book and the themes that come up in the book, which, as I say, do sort of tap into some of this subjects of men being the expectations of men at this time. So I'm going to lead you straight into that, and I hope you enjoy the conversation I had with AJ. I certainly did. It was really, really interesting. I urge you to read the book if you haven't already. If you listen to audiobooks, the audiobook is wonderful. I really, really enjoyed it, and I say that in the interview. And also check out AJ's website, because there's a lot of information on there. Again, as we say in the interview, there's a lot of information about his research and stuff on his website, so you can take a look at that as well. After I've played the interview, there will be a small trailer for the book. And that will be the end of this week's Wine and Words. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you again very soon, and there's lots of interesting things coming up for Wine and Words, so do keep in touch. Thank you so much. Hello and welcome to Wine and Words. I am Sarah Jane Rose, audiobook narrator and wine consultant, and I'm here today with A.J. West, journalist, broadcaster and writer, and we're going to be talking about his wonderful book, The Spirit Engineer, which is part of our Mystery March programme. So I'm going to bring AJ in now. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thanks. I'm having a busy day, but I got some writing done, so that was helpful.
And you got some running done by the sound of it as well, which is good. Well done for fitting that in.
Did get some running done. It's a very sedentary life, isn't it, as a writer? And I realised early on I've had a history of back pain, which is not very interesting to anyone watching, I know. But walking and running is apparently what I should be doing. So I'm trying to stay active.
No, well, I'm sat in, constantly sat either recording or whatever, and I have my watch now, which literally tells me, goes, get up, move. Okay. Because as you say, you do end up with a bad back. So first of all, let's just find out a little bit about you. Tell us about your career so far, what you've been up to, and what led you to write The Spirit Engineer, which is your first book.
Crikey. So when I was a little boy, I was quite isolated. I was very shy. I didn't have any friends when I was at school. I was not like the other boys. Little known to me, I would grow up to be a homosexual man, and whether or not that's relevant, but I was always the odd one out. And so I found refuge in reading. It wasn't for me just a pastime. I lived inside of these books, my famous fives and Animals of Farthing Wood, and all these beautiful, wonderful books, Roald Dahl's books. They were absolutely a place of escape, really, and safety for me as a little boy. And so as I was reading books, I started then writing my own stories. So I've always written from a very, very young age, but I didn't really know what kind of novelist I was going to be. I knew I loved reading historical fiction, but it was only when I was working as a TV newsreader in Northern Ireland that I was reading a book called A Magician Among the Spirits by Harry Houdini, and he mentioned mentioned in passing at the kind of end of this memoir, where he's going around the world debunking spiritual mediums. He mentions in passing William Jackson Crawford, who is this gentleman from Belfast who Houdini met, and Houdini came to the conclusion this guy was, I literally, he said, mad. This man is mad. And then a little bit later, he mentions again, really just as a throwaway comment, that William Jackson Crawford took his own life after 6 years of investigating a spiritual medium called Kathleen Gallagher. Took his own life on picky rocks in Bangor, took potassium cyanide, and no one really knew why. Houdini speculated it was because he had found out that he'd been fooled for 6 years by a fake medium, whereas Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a big fan of Kathleen Gallagher as a spiritual medium, and also William's experiments. Arthur Conan Doyle, obviously Sherlock Holmes, but was also the doyen of the spiritualist movement worldwide at the time. He said, no, this was the professor's last greatest experiment. And I found this story, and as someone with a journalistic background and a lifelong passion for storytelling, I found this thing and I just thought, my gosh, like, this is the most incredible story I've ever come across. It's completely forgotten. At the moment, only I and a handful of other people around the world know that these people even existed and went through this extraordinary journey. I thought it's thrilling, but it was also terrifying, because I thought, if I can't turn that into a novel, a decent enough novel, then I'm not a novelist, and therefore I will have completely failed in my life's ambition.
It's quite a responsibility to take that on. You know,
yeah, felt like
setting a piece of fiction, you're bringing forth something that is, yes, you know, you're presenting it as historical fiction, but you're bringing something back to life and making people aware of things that did actually happen. And I think that period of spiritualism that's approached in the book is just so fascinating, and it's lovely that you've approached it with such detail and kind of care. I think I obviously knew when I first read the book that you had a journalistic background, but for me, that it comes across, it's very detailed. I feel like lots of, without being, there's not an over descriptive stuff or anything, but it's very detailed in terms of things that are going on, and even the emotions and everything. And I think that it to me, it comes across that you've done a lot of research in order to build these characters, because I talk about this a lot in Wine and Words. I'm, as a reader and listener, I'm very character driven, and what you've done here, particularly with the main character, is come up with very complex characters, I think, that really do take you on a journey. And for me, this main character, William, is very difficult, because for a lot of the book, he's quite unlikable. There's so many things. As a mother, there's a lot of things that he does that just made me go, oh, God, and he's sort of quite unlikable. However, he takes you on this very emotional journey. So was that something that you kind of researched about men at the time, or was it just a decision you made to make him that kind of character?
I think in the research that I carried out into the socio-political world that I was writing into, and also studying William's essays and his books, his letters, seeing his photographs, following his experiments, I got a really strong sense of him as a man. And there were also letters I read written by his contemporaries after he passed. Houdini said he was mad. Even his friends said, and his supporters said, that he was a somewhat eccentric man. He was quite highly strung. He was quite a nervous man. So a lot of this, the semantics that came through were telling me a story about who this person was. And I suppose after 15 years of journalism, it does give you quite a canny sense of being able to meet people quite briefly and try and get a sense of who they are and what makes them tick. That's part of any successful journalist's repertoire, to be able to do that. So I found quite quickly that I connected with this guy, but it wasn't so much a historic thing. It was a very present thing. I am a man, and I am flawed, and I am insecure. I have deep set feelings of inadequacy. I grew up in a world where I was not equal to the manhood I was expected to be. I was quite a camp little boy. I was very creative. I didn't do the jumping up trees and playing football and having fights and things. The things that the world at that time in the 80s was telling me I should have to be. And I understood actually what it felt to be a kind of a square peg in a round hole as a guy. And I think for me, whether that was him in real life or not, we can speculate. But for me, as the character, I wanted to explore a man's journey through his own sense of failure and inadequacy, which he openly admits in the book, towards a kind of monstrousness. And you talk about I love Jekyll and Hyde, for instance, is an inspiration for me. Dorian Gray, talk about Mary Shelley's writing, that exploration of the descent of a mind to monstrousness. I've always found fascinating. And at the time when I was writing the book, I was going through my own very difficult period where I was working through having no money, having no job, having no partner, didn't know who I was. I'd left a career as a journalist. I'd come out of a reality TV program, Big Brother. I was surrounded by crazy people doing crazy things and under huge pressure to be crazy myself. And I totally lost sense of where I was and who I was. So all of that mixed together, I suppose, comes out the other side as William Jackson Crawford in my telling of him.
Yeah, and I think and I think because of that, because of the complexity of him as a character, and as you say, the things that you were going through at the time, it does give you, although there are moments in the book where you are like, oh God, there is a huge amount of sympathy for him, because you become aware, or I certainly became aware, of and it kind of speaks to you in the modern day society, even still now, of this sort of toxic masculinity as we talk about now, because he's having to has this responsibility to his family. He's having to, there's a moment where he goes to cry in a bathroom, and he has to go and do it on his own. He can't possibly be seen to have any emotion. And that's still true now, that men still feel like they can't be emotional. And where does that then lead? And I think that's kind of almost, it's a bit of the journey that we go on with him, isn't it? Is that he's has so much responsibility, and then so much kind of holding on to his emotions.
People say to me sometimes, they come up to me almost kind of apologetically and say, I didn't like William very much. And I'm like, that you're not meant to, you're not meant to. He's, I don't think it's quite a modern idea. I think that you have to want to go for a pint with the lead character of a book once you've finished it. Oh, I really like them. They were my best friend while I was reading it. That can be great, and it has its place. And in fact, that's something I'm following for my second book. But I didn't want the reader to like William. I wanted the reader to try and understand William, and to understand how he got to where he was. For me, that's actually something that's very prescient for the conversation that's being had today. I find even the term toxic masculinity problematic, because I also know some very toxic women, and I wouldn't describe toxic femininity. I think there are toxic people and toxic behaviors. And they're created by circumstance. And certainly, I think if we look back through history, one of the things we can learn from the early 1900s, as we emerged from Victorian times, and we've now got King Edward, and then George, is that even though society was loosening up, it was still holding on to what you just referred to there, which is this rigidity around what is maleness and what is it to be a man. And that if you're asking a guy to live in a world where he's being ridiculed by his peers, where he's not got money, where women in his life are also ridiculing him, where he feels inadequate as a father, where he feels inadequate sexually because he has a very damaged childhood, all of these things together. And he can't even say, I feel inadequate. Exactly what you showed empathy to. It gives me a great sense of satisfaction and also reassurance when readers say that they understand that journey. Understanding that's how William becomes toxic is not the same as saying I'm okay with his toxicity. And isn't that actually the very crux of the conversation we're having now about male behavior, but also general behavior, which is we can condemn it, but we also do have to try and understand, well, what's created people who behave this way?
And also I think and our reactions to it. So again, in the book, it's the way that people react to him as well, which feeds it even more. So it is genuinely, and as you say, you don't particularly like him as a person. However, I personally, that you end up with a huge amount of like, oh God, it's almost something that has happened to him. He has become this person because of these things that have happened to him. Well, let's just have a talk. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to complete the thought, because the way you just put that really made me think about it. And I'm very much involved with social media and things, and I think any system that is set up to reward people for harmful behavior is a really dangerous system. And I think we've now got that worse than ever with social media, where you get clicks and likes and retweets for saying very controversial things. But I think William was a victim of that. I was a bit of a victim of that when I was going through reality TV and things. But anyway, you just put it really well. And I thought,
and I think you said, and that's why it's a fascinating book that is set in history, but is so, for me, resonates literally with now. Today, even there's so much in it that for me resonates with things that are going on, the way that we behave and the way that we treat people. But let's have a little look at the sort of if you like, the other element of the book, which is the spiritualism, and that kind of period where they became. So the book takes place in 1914, 2 years after the sinking of the Titanic. It's obviously set in Belfast, which is where he was. But you said you were in Belfast at the time. You were,
yes.
or when you were writing. Was that before? So was that before you started writing the book, or?
I found the story just before I left the BBC. So I wrote the book in London mostly.
Okay. But you spent quite a lot of time.
Belfast, yeah. But I'd spent 4.5 years working and living in Northern Ireland, so I knew it very, very well and loved it. I have a passionate and long-standing love for Belfast. It was not what I expected. It's a wonderful city.
Yeah. So we go into this sort of exploration of spiritualism throughout the book. And do you think that in that time period, that again, it's that the spiritualism was a reaction to the world, effectively, because of how difficult everything is? Lots of things that again that are mentioned in the book. There's lots of references to sort of child death and that kind of thing, because the rates were very high, and obviously then you'd had the Titanic. And do you think that spiritualism sort of was a reaction to that, and that's why we have such a huge amount of it during that period?
In Belfast, certainly, you have the shadow of the Titanic, across the whole of society. It was a huge shock, and it's very difficult actually for us to understand that those ships were such a point of pride and daily life of the population in Belfast. Mainly the Protestant population, it has to be said. So when that ship went down, it was just cataclysmic. It was huge. not just the loss of life, but also the loss of belief and the loss of pride. So that was definitely part of it in Belfast. You had the looming of the First World War, and around this time, there was,
and that's referenced in the book again, and that's kind of what I mean about the detail of what goes on in the book, is because there's references of things that have happened, reactions of things that happen, and things that are quite clearly,
those are the details that, even though it's just a passing reference, it has to be right, because actually there's a lot of misnomers about the war, First World War and Second World War, and Northern Ireland and Ireland, and how they were involved. In fact, a lot of Catholic men went to fight for the British Empire and were very happy to do so. People don't assume that's the case. So it was very, very complex. But yes, there was of course a lot of death around, with disease, and with heavy industry, and then obviously, as you say, the Titanic and various other things. However, what I would say, when people say to me, oh, the reason spiritualism was so big at that time was because of various wars and the Spanish flu and yada, yada, yada. I say, well, as someone who takes a very keen interest in history, you can read Samuel Pepys' diary, where he goes through, 1666, right? And a plague that kills like everyone he knows. He's not going to seances. So I think the difference actually is that we've met a point in the early 1900s where you have an increasingly secular society. Religion is really being challenged in a way it has never been challenged before by technology and science. And then you also have mortality. And it's those three that come together. And I would also add to that, when I was researching Arthur Conan Doyle's exploration of the spiritual afterlife, it's very interesting. It's a lightning bolt moment. He decided that he was going to call the afterlife, or the world beyond the divide, Summerland. And I thought that perfectly sums it up, because 50 years before, Arthur Conan Doyle would have been wearing a pith helmet, marching into the jungles, finding new territories, or sailing off into uncharted waters. This is the first time in human history when human beings kind of feel like we know where everything is. There are no more continents to discover. The map doesn't have empty patches on it anymore. We can't get to space. We can't get to the bottom of the ocean. Technology isn't quite there yet, and we can't quite fly-ish. We can float in dirigibles. We're learning to fly. So where can we explore in a world where you can pick up a receiver and hear the voice of someone in America across the ocean? Why shouldn't you be able to pick up a receiver and hear someone across the divide between life and death? I think it's easy for us now, with the technology we have, to think, oh well, everyone was dying, so they were scared of death, so they wanted to talk to ghosts. It was actually much more than that. We genuinely believed that technologically it was something we could possibly do. Same as H.G. Wells writing about time travel and discovering different worlds within our planet. I think there's a particular breed of people, and at the time, because of the patriarchy, men who wanted to explore and discover new continents. And when Arthur Conan Doyle writes Summerland, it's almost like he's planting the British flag on a new continent and saying, that's mine.
I know that's fascinating. It's fascinating. I genuinely hadn't thought of it in that way. And you're right, that makes total sense, that all of those things have pointed towards them genuinely believing, or certain elements of people genuinely believing. And in the book, you've got that kind of coming together a little bit, because he comes in obviously as an engineer and wants to sort of solve the puzzle of whether this is real or not. No, it's brilliant. It's fascinating. Now let's talk about, now I listened to the audiobook, is how I enjoyed the book, because I love audiobooks, and it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And I know that for you, it was quite a personal experience because you're an audiobook producer yourself. So tell us a little bit about why you decided to do an audiobook and how that journey was for you.
Well, the Spirit Engineer is published by Duckworth, which is a small independent publisher. It's been around for nigh on 200 years now, but it's a small publisher. It doesn't always do audiobooks for the books that it publishes. And I was really kind of campaigning in the background. It's got to be an audiobook. It's got to be, because I've written it with these voices in my head. I write audio, really. When I write dialogue, I'm acting it out in my head, you know. And so I knew that I wanted it to be an audiobook, but it wasn't guaranteed. So in the end, they said, do you want to read it? And I was like, absolutely, under no circumstances, because I can't do the accents. I'm not a great reader of my own work out loud. I find it very difficult. You're an audiobook narrator. And I wish I could say I can do non-fiction, but fiction, I sometimes, I think, struggle with.
But also, if it's your own, I do sometimes think if it's your own work, it's even harder, because it'd probably just literally take you years to do it, because you probably wouldn't get it the way that you would want it. Whereas if you go to somebody else to do it, then they're going to give you maybe a different perspective or a different view of it.
Yeah,
Because it's particularly if you write in the way that you say, where you've got these very specific voices in your head, then that can be very difficult.
Yes, I mean, I had Maggie Smith was Adelia Carter. Steve Pemberton was Stoop. David Tennant was William. You know, I had these voices in my head. I had Derek Jacobi as a kind of narrative voice, because I just love voices. I love actors' voices. So yes, when I hear myself reading it, I just know that it's a retrograde version. So I said absolutely not. I wasn't going to read it myself. But I said I would produce it, because actually that will make it a cheaper process for the publisher. And so they agreed, and I was very, very pleased to do that. It was an extremely intense 2 days recording the audiobook. We did it in 2 days. It was right to the wire, like the end of the second
2 days. It's a long book. 2 days is quite an achievement.
Yes, especially for Dickon. Dickon had never read an audiobook before, and there's a lot of drama in there. There's a lot of different voices. You've got women, men, young, old, Irish, English, American. You know, an impression of Arthur Conan Doyle. None of this is particularly easy. So it was a huge.
To be honest, I would say, particularly doing it under those circumstances is interesting, because what doesn't happen in the book, the pacing of the drama and stuff is really beautifully done. And I think under those circumstances of doing something, we've got 2 days, we've got to do it in 2 days, you could end up with screwing that up. and that definitely hasn't happened. You know, the pacing of it is beautiful.
Well, that's good. Thank you. It's lovely to hear. It was quite fraught in a way, but most of it I actually spent just enjoying hearing for the first time my words read aloud by such a gorgeously voiced human being. Dickon Farmer is an actor. He's appeared in some adverts, and he does a lot of stage work. Actually, most of his work is on stage. I know him personally, and the publisher said, well, who do you think should read the book? And I was looking at actors and looking at agent sites and things. They all would have been very, very good. But then Dickon sent me a voice note of him reading a page from the book, kind of on spec, just because I think he could tell I was like, oh, I don't know if you're ready. And as soon as I heard his voice, it was so rich and so deep, and I was just there with him. And I think the best audiobook narrators that I've ever produced, it's where you're not listening to a voice, you're kind of with it.
Yeah, they should definitely be taking you on the story, which he definitely does. And it, you know, I highly recommend it to anybody who enjoys audiobooks. And even if you read the book as well, I do quite like that thing where you read bits of it, and then you go back and listen to the audiobook. I love doing that. No, that's great. It's really interesting to hear that journey. So now tell us what you are in the midst of writing your next book. So tell us about that and what's happening with that. How are you getting on?
I'm getting on well. I'm writing it in the London Library. I don't know if any of the members of your book club have been there. I would say you can pay £20 and you can spend a day there. You have to apply and they have to accept you. But it's, bureaucracy you can go through. It's an amazing...
Not the British Library, the London Library.
Not the British Library. So this is on St James's Square behind Fortnum and Mason. It's an old Victorian building. It is I'd say it's the most extraordinary building I have ever been in. If you have an interest in books, Bram Stoker wrote Dracula there. Conan Doyle was a member. He wrote his Sherlock Holmes books. There's even a scene of Watson going into the London Library to get books to help him research. I'm trying to think. Basically, every author I admire. I have terrible memory loss sometimes when I'm in interviews. Sorry, various amazing authors. Angela Carter. That's what I'm trying to think.
Okay. Yep.
Angela Carter. She wrote while she was a member there. Anyway, so I'm sitting there, I'm writing. It's coming along very, very well. I can't give a huge amount of detail on the second book, only to say that it's based around a true story again. It's in Georgian London this time, and it's about a kind of societal criminal underworld that hasn't really been explored in British literature, as far as I can see, before. So again, there's a lot of pressure there to get it right, but it's just fascinating. I think of my writing as like stepping inside a time machine. So to go there and head back to the 1700s and to look between, I've got a map from, I think it's 1740, and you can I don't know if anyone here has used it, the London Layers website. Mm-hmm. So you can go from the 1740 map and then bring it back to the current map of London, and it is just amazing how many of these streets and buildings that I'm writing about are still there. Even actually there was an account I was reading, Ned Ward's London Spy, which is a kind of tongue-in-cheek but contemporary account written by a guy in the 1700s, in around 1700, about London, almost like a tourist guide for ne'er-do-well men, basically. And he goes and looks at a waxwork mannequin of Charles II in Westminster Abbey, and I the other day went to Westminster Abbey and looked at the same waxwork mannequin of Charles II. It's exactly the same. It's still there. They haven't even moved the box, and I find that mind blowing.
Yeah,
completely mind blowing.
That's wonderful. And so you're when will we see that? Do you know? Is there a deadline? Are you?
No, I got no. I got published without an agent, actually, and I landed my agent a month before the Spirit Engineer was published. So I'm working now with this new agent on the manuscript for the second book. Most authors will have their second manuscript written by the time pretty much their first book is published. So I'm a bit behind in that sense, but it's coming along great guns. I'm already about 40,000 words in after 10 weeks of writing, which isn't too bad going, I don't think. That's okay.
Now, you mentioned before about an event in July. Tell us about that.
Yes, so I was very excited. In October last year, when my book was released, we held something called the Book Party, which was in the Phoenix Artists Club in London. And it was basically, yeah, it's a fantastic venue, isn't it? And it was a really lovely coming together of book bloggers and passionate readers and authors, but not like a book festival as such. It was a party, so people were enjoying a drink or just having a chat. It was very relaxed. And authors, I think readers don't fully understand or appreciate how important it is for authors to speak to their readers directly and to hear the enthusiasm and to road test ideas and things. It's a magical thing. And it was just great to see that happen. So in July of this year, on July 16th, there's going to be the summer book party. It is in London again. We don't have we're just confirming the location now. But if you follow me on my social media, you'll see it. But it's a great way. We've already booked 2 #1 best-selling authors who are huge names in the industry, and there are other authors joining as well. So it's going to be a really good opportunity to meet writers.
That sounds amazing. That sounds brilliant. Well, when you've got everything confirmed, send me a link and everything, and I'll put it all up. In the meantime, speaking of following you, let's just put this in here. So you can find all about AJ on his website on ajwestauthor.com, but you can also follow you on Instagram, which is at AJ West. That's right, isn't it?
At AJ West Author on all.
He's at AJ West Author. So yeah, okay. So all at AJ West Author, and you can find him online and follow him and see what he's up to. But I highly recommend, if you haven't already read or listened to The Spirit Engineer, I really enjoyed it. It takes you on a magnificent journey, and has a lot of resonance with today. So thank you very much for sharing it with us. It's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in July at the book party.
Yes, definitely.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.